Hey there knitters, I'm Caddy Melville Ledbetter of Caddy Knits, and today I'm going to show you how to make the Knit Color Swatch Scarf by yarnspirations.com. This is a super fun project. The stitch pattern has beautiful texture and is really fun and easy to knit, which is important because it is a long scarf, so it does take some time. I love the length though. I love that I can wear it really long, which looks amazing, or I can wrap it a couple times on those extra cold days. The skill level we're working with today is easy. The skills you'll need for this project are knitting, purling, and casting on. What I'm going to show you today is how to alternate your knits and purls and work with a stitch pattern. I'm going to show you how to change color. I'm going to show you how to bind off in pattern and add fringe to the ends of our scarf. The yarn we're working with today is Caron and Pantone, and I'm so excited about this yarn. It's 60% acrylic, 20% nylon, and 20% merino wool, fully machine washable and dryable, and it is so very soft. It feels amazing on my skin, and I really loved working with it. It felt really great in my hands. So before we dive into this awesome project, let's take a closer look at this amazing yarn we're going to be working with today. You've probably heard of Caron yarns before, but what's really exciting about this yarn is that Caron has teamed up with the color experts at Pantone to bring you these amazing color braids. And each braid comes with 5 different links of different shades of yarn that have been carefully chosen to go together beautifully in any order you choose. If you look at the tag, you'll notice they've listed the inspiration right on the tag, so you can see the colors there that were chosen. And then if you lift the tag up, you'll see a project done 2 different ways, but with the same color braid. So this is a hat here that was done with the yarns in different orders. It really looks like 2 different hats. So Caron and Pantone is really inviting you to use your creativity here, because these links can be taken off and separated and used in any way you like. I'm showing you version 1 of the scarf today, so I'm going to need 2 full braids of the blueberry color braid, and then I'm also going to need 1 braid of the coconut cream for my main color. You'll also need a 6mm needle. It can be circular or straight, whatever you prefer. You'll need a measuring tape for your gauge, a tapestry needle, and a crochet hook slightly smaller than your needle size, and that's for adding our fringe later. So before we get started, you do need to separate and wind these links into balls. And that may seem a little daunting, but don't worry, there's only about 30 yards in each, so it takes no time at all to wind. You don't have to wind them all at once, you can wind them as you go. I actually really enjoyed taking a break from my scarf to wind yarn because it was so quick. So you can go to the opposite end of your tag and you'll see a little strand of yarn there, and that's what's holding the braid together. So very gently with your scissors you want to get under just that link of yarn and cut, and that will release the first braid. And just pull it out. And then it's doubled, so you need to find where it's tied. That's what we cut, we don't need that. Okay, right here is where it's tied. So you need to undo that, open it up. Make sure you can really see where it's looped around the yarn. So it's clearly not tangled at all. If it was like this, I would know that I need to move that yarn a little bit. Just like that. Now you can put this on a back of a chair, you can use your friend's hands, you can use your knee, but what you need to do is just give it a little bit of tension, and then you can undo this or cut it if you have trouble with the knot. Just like that. Make sure you don't tangle it up. And then you're just going to wind into a ball. So get some out, and then just start wrapping it around your fingers loosely. Once you have some around your fingers, you can take it off and just start winding, and it will become a ball quite quickly. So once you have yours completely wound into a ball, you are ready to get started, and we will work on our gauge coming up right next. So once you have your yarn wound up into your ball, you're ready to start your gauge swatch. And gauge is important for this scarf because the finite amount of yarn in each shade requires a certain amount of yardage, so we don't want to run out of yarn, so we do want to make sure we get gauge. And what I suggest is using your main color to cast on the 30 stitches required for the scarf, working your 4 inches, and that way if you get gauge, you've already got the first chunk of your scarf done and you can move on. If you don't get gauge, well, you've got some really important practice done on your stitch pattern before starting your scarf. So before we talk about gauge, let's just go through the 4 rows of the stitch pattern so you can get really comfortable with them. I just have a tiny swatch cast on here. I'm just going to use 8 stitches to take you through the 4 rows. I've used the long tail cast on. You can use any cast on you like. It's totally up to you. But do take a mental note of where your tail is hanging from on your right side row. So I've cast on, I'm ready for my first row, which is a right side row, and my tail is hanging from the right hand corner of a right side row. I want to remember that because this stitch pattern looks very similar, right side and wrong side, so I need that indicator. Okay, so I'm ready to start. My first row starts with a knit, and I'm alternating knitting and purling. So I'm going to knit 1, and before I can purl, I have to move my yarn forward. So the most important thing with this stitch pattern is that you are moving your yarn in between every stitch on every row. So yarn forward to purl. And then I have to move my yarn back to knit. And forward again to purl. Back to knit. Forward to purl. All the way to the end of the row. This may seem a little daunting, but I promise you it does become second nature quite quickly, and you get a really nice flow moving your yarn back and forth. So now I'm ready on a row 2. I know I'm on a wrong side row, and this row starts with a knit as well. So again, I am knitting, yarn forward to purl, and back to knit, forward to purl, forward. You can kind of say it to yourself in your head, yarn back, knit, yarn forward, purl. All right, now we've got a row 3 coming up. And what's really cool about this stitch pattern that I noticed is that all right side rows are seed stitch. And the seed stitch, you purl knits and knit purls. So I know I'm on a right side row because of where my tail is. So I know that I'm starting with a purl because I can see my flat knit right here. So I'm going to go ahead and purl the first stitch. And then yarn back, knit. And now let's see what this looks like for you left-hand carriers out there. And you'll have to bear with me, I'm a little awkward because I don't usually use the left-hand carry. So yarn forward to purl. I gotta use my thumb here to hook it. And then my yarn kind of just goes back like that, really easy, and then I'm ready to knit. And then I'm just gonna dip my needle under to bring the yarn forward to purl. And back to knit. It's kind of fun. Purl. And back to knit. So that was row 3. All right, so now I'm ready for a row 4, which is a wrong side row. And the cool thing about the wrong side rows is that they're always 1 by 1 rib. And with 1 by 1 rib, you are purling purls and knitting knits every wrong side row. So now I know I'm starting with a purl. So I'm purling my purl and knitting my flat knit. I can see the little V here. Yarn forward to purl, yarn back to knit. So the great thing about this stitch pattern is that if you take a break and come back to it a couple hours later, you don't need to know what row you're on. All you need to know is whether you're on a right side or a wrong side row. Right side rows, you knit the pearls and purl the knits. Wrong side rows, you purl the pearls and knit the knits. So that should help keep you on track. So once you have your 4 inches of your swatch ready to measure, we will do our gauge. And I'm going to show you how to do that on a finished scarf right here. I think I will show you in the blue. I think it'll be a little easier to see. You'll be working in your white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a knit stitch close to the edge here, and that's where I'm going to start counting. But I'm going to pick this V right here, and I'm going to mark it with a tapestry needle so I know where I'm starting to count. So I'm starting with this little V right here. And I'm going to take my measuring tape and place the 4-inch mark right outside that V. So there's my little V, and I'm placing my 4-inch mark on the far outside edge of that V. And I'm going to go over and find the stitch that my measuring tape ends at, which is this V right here. So it's the outside edge of that V. And then I'm going to mark that V with another tapestry needle, and that way I can remove my measuring tape and not worry about it shifting and moving as I count. I go completely cross-eyed trying to count my gauge, especially in a stitch pattern like this, so this helps me a lot. So now I'm counting a V and then a purl bump, and then a V and then a purl bump, and that way I'll have an accurate measure of my gauge. So I'm starting here on the inside of my tapestry needle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Perfect, that's what I want. I want 15 stitches in 4 inches. So my stitch gauge is right on track. If you have too many stitches in your 4 inches, try moving to one size larger of a needle and starting another gauge swatch. If you have too few, you can try moving to one size smaller and start another gauge swatch. If you're not totally comfortable with the stitch pattern yet, keep practicing. Your gauge will not be accurate until you're really feeling good about this stitch pattern. So for our row gauge, I'm going to move back to the white. The row gauge doesn't matter as much because we're working with length and inches, so you can work to those inches whether your row gauge matches perfectly, but I'll show you how to measure it anyway. I'm going to find where 2 knits are together at the very top of my white section, because I know my white section is about 4 inches. I'm going to lay my measuring tape down on the very outside top of that first V. And then I can tell that the bottom of my scarf is the 4-inch mark. So I'm going to count from there to the bottom. And this stitch pattern is super tricky to count your rows. A lot of stitches look like stitches that aren't. So as long as you count 2 V's and then 2 purl bumps and then 2 V's and 2 purl bumps, you'll get an accurate row gauge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So I'm right on track with my row gauge. If you're close-ish, continue on, it'll be fine, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So once you have gauge and you've got your 4 inches, you're ready to change color. So I'll show you how to do that next. All right, so once you have your 4 inches of your main color, you're ready to switch to your first contrast color. You can choose any color of the color braid you like as your first color. And what you're going to do is simply stop working with your main color and start working with your contrast color. If you always do this on a right side row, your tails will always be hanging from a right side row on the right side. It's a whole lot of right side going on. But it's a great indicator because as your scarf gets longer, you don't have to go looking for your cast-on tail anymore. You'll know that when you see your tails on the right side, you're on a right side row. So we just go ahead and start working with our new color. I'm using this beautiful blue, and I'm going to leave a nice long tail. and I'm just gonna hook it onto my needle and start working with it. Now it will be a little loose and sloppy on the edge there, so you can give a tug of your old yarn to help anchor it. And then when you bring your yarn forward, make sure you're not bringing your tail forward, but your actual working yarn. So yarn forward to purl, back to knit, and you're just going to work your row in your new color. And don't worry about that sloppy first stitch. When you get to the end of your row, you can give it a little tug to tighten it up by pulling on both of the tails. And then when you sew in your tails at the end, that will all get fixed up and beautiful. So don't worry about it for now. So let's go back to our pattern. Once we switch to our contrast color, we need to work about 12 inches. So you're going to run out of your first link of this color, and you're going to need to add the second link. So you're going to wind that into a ball and get it ready to go. And when you're almost done with this color, you can add the next link. And I'm going to show you a really cool technique called knitting in your tails, which is going to decrease the amount of tails you need to sew in at the end. This works really well when you are adding the same color. It doesn't work so well if you're adding a different color because it does show. So we'll go ahead and do that next when you're ready to move on to your second link. So when you're ready to move on to your second link of your color, you can knit in your tails. This is super fun. So I'm on a right side row, so I know I'm working seed stitch, purling my knits, get my yarn in the right position. So what you're going to do is you're going to work partway into your row with your old yarn. So the yarn you're almost out of, but leave yourself quite a bit because you're going to work a bit of the row with it. So maybe a yard or so. And go ahead and work 6 stitches or so into your row. I'm only going to do 3 because I have a tiny swatch here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work about 6 stitches or so with my new ball that I'm adding. So you leave a little tail and you just link it up with the old yarn together like that, and then you're going to work about 6 stitches with both. 1, I'm only going to do about 3, but you'll want to do about 6. And then what you'll do is you'll drop the old yarn, so the yarn you're almost out of, and work only with the new yarn till the end of the row. Just like that. So the only thing you need to remember is when you work back along that row, you've got to maintain that stitch. So those ones that you doubled, you don't want to work them as 2. They look like 2, but they're not. They are just 1. So you've got to work them as 1. You can see them here. They look like they could be 2 different stitches, but they're not. They are 1 stitch. All the way to the end of the row. Now I'll show you what it looks like when you actually use this technique. I'll show you on my finished scarf. Show you in this color. You'll see it best. So I'll give you a minute to try to find where I actually did it, and then I'll turn it around and show you, do the reveal. All right, so right here. Here is where I did that technique. So you can see it's a little thicker there. And here are my little tails I trimmed, because you don't need to sew your tails in. You just need to trim them. And it doesn't matter if you do this technique on a right side or a wrong side row. Your tails, if they end up hanging out on your right side row, all you need to do is thread a tapestry needle and bring them to the wrong side and give them a little trim. So I'll just quickly show you what that looks like on my little swatch. So there are my little tails from my joining of the yarn there, knitting in my tails. So all I need to do is trim those to 1/2 inch. They're already on the wrong side. All right, so you're going to continue on with your contrast color till you have about 12 inches or so. Keep in mind you want to use your leftover contrast color for your fringe. So if you find yourself at about 11.5 inches and you're running out of contrast color, go ahead and switch to your main color. If you get to 11.5, 11.75, that's totally fine. You want to save a few yards for your fringe. So let's go back to our pattern for a second and see what we're doing next. So once we do the contrast color, main color, back to contrast color, we're continuing on working from double star to double star. So really that's just telling you go back to the top and you repeat what you've already done. So you're doing your main color into your first contrast color, into main color, into contrast color, all the way to the end of your scarf till you get to your last contrast color. Mine happens to be the navy. And once you finish your 12 inches of your contrast color, you are ready to bind off in pattern, and I'll show you how to do that next. All right, so once you've finished your last contrast color, you are ready to bind off in pattern, and binding off in pattern simply means that you're going to maintain your stitch pattern as you bind off. So I'm on a right side row. Please excuse all my tails here, I joined some yarn. So this is my working yarn here. I'm on a right side row, so I am purling my knit. I'm going to do the simple chain bind off, where you work 2 stitches, you lift the first one over the second one. Now I need to bring my yarn forward to purl because I'm maintaining my stitch pattern. Yarn back and lift that one over. And then I'm knitting, lifting, and you want to do this a little looser than you knit. It just makes for a less tight cast off edge. And then back, lift that one over, and lift the first one over, all the way to the end, to the last stitch. And then with the last one, you're just going to open it up nice and big, and then you can cut, leaving a nice long tail because you can use it for your fringe. So I'm leaving a longer tail than usual. Then I'm just going to bring it through the loop and pull it tight. And there's my cast off edge. All right, you are nearly done your scarf. This is super exciting. All that's left is sewing in tails and adding fringe. So let me show you how I sew tails in. I have one tail left here to sew in on the edge of my scarf. I like to sew all my tails in on wrong side rows. That way all the little nubs at the end of my tails are all on a wrong side row and they don't show when I wear my scarf. So I'm threading my tapestry needle. You might find your edge tails here a little loose and sloppy, so you can give them a little tug and then anchor them just like that, and then go over to the wrong side. And all I do is I just weave up and down through the stitches about 5 or 6 times. And then I go back the way I came, but not exactly or it'll come out, just anchoring it a little bit more, maybe 3 or 4 times. Just like that. If you go too close to the edge, your little end might show at the edge, so stay a little in, and then all you need to do is trim 1/2 inch, and that's weaving in your tails. Pretty simple. You'll have lots to sew in. I definitely recommend sewing all your tails in first before you add fringe, because adding fringe is really fun and sewing tails in is not quite as fun. So save the best for last. All right, last thing, adding fringe. This is a finished end of fringe on my scarf. Now I didn't have a lot of contrast color left over, so I ended up using a lot of the coconut cream, but I love how it looks against the blue. I think it looks really great. You can do whatever you want with your leftover yarn. Get creative, make it have a pattern or random or anything you want. So the first thing you need to do is cut lengths of 16 inches with your leftover yarn. So you can just open your measuring tape to 16 inches and just cut lots and lots of lengths of yarn that are 16 inches. You'll need 3 lengths of 16 inches for each tassel, and you'll probably do about 12 tassels on each end of your scarf. So I have some lengths already ready here to add to the end I haven't finished yet. And I've just folded them in half because they need to be folded in half to add to my scarf. And this end needs a couple more, right about here. So I'm going to grab my crochet hook. Now what you want to keep in mind is that when you're inserting your crochet hook, you don't want to grab just one little strand of your knitting. That is going to drag your cast on edge and stretch it out with your tassels. You want to make sure you've got at least 3 strands to keep those edges nice and strong. So you just insert your crochet hook, grab your tassels that are folded in half, just like that. And then you're going to loop it onto your crochet hook. You have to pull nice and tight and then bring it through. And then you just open up that loop and bring the ends through the loop. Just like that. I've spaced mine about 1 centimeter apart. You can do whatever you want. You can have them closer, further. It's totally up to you. I have room for one more here, and I'm going to throw my tail into my tassel as well. So again, I want to make sure I go into a good chunk of knitting here. Pull tight, and it is a little tricky. There we go. And then I'm going to grab my tail too and bring it through. There we go. My tassels are finished. The only thing left is to give them a little haircut. I don't know about you, but mine definitely need a little haircut. I've got all kinds of lengths going on here. So I'm going to find my shortest one, and I'm just going to trim to that shortest one there, all the way across. Doesn't have to be perfect by any means. Just trim all the way across. All right, give that one a little cut. And voila, your scarf is finished. Bring on the cold weather. I can't wait to wear this scarf. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you enjoy wearing or gifting your scarf. Don't forget to check out Yarnspirations for more patterns and ideas for your next project. I'm Caddy Melville Ledbetter. You can find me at caddyknits.com. Until next time, I wish you very happy knitting.